Hello, my friends, and blessings on your day. Thank you for clicking the link for the Holy Trinity Bible study. We'll be looking ahead to this coming Sunday's Gospel reading, Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Of all the miracles of Jesus, perhaps none are as startling or mystifying as his raising a person from the dead. In the Gospel of John, this raising in chapter 11 is the last of his great signs and miracles in the Gospel. You'll remember previously this year, he changed the water into wine at Cana. We read this back in January. 2 weeks ago, the conversion of an entire town in Samaria because of the action of a woman he met at a well. And then last week, Jesus healing a man blind from birth. In this Bible study, we also look at works of art from Christian history, and I thought we would begin by viewing this image of a painting by the American Henry Ossawa Tanner, painted about 120 years ago. A very realistic portrayal, perhaps biased a little bit with the American method of burial in graves rather than tombs. But that aside, what do you notice in this painting? In a realistic portrait, we can perhaps more easily imagine ourselves in the view. Would we be one of the characters? Would we be an onlooker? And as we look at more symbolic works, what does this tell us about our faith? What is the Lord trying to teach us, not only through the story, but through the inspiration of the artist, and through the artist and the artist's method? How do we deepen our faith? Lazarus, as he is described to us in the Gospels, had two sisters, Mary and Martha, and this lithograph by Jean Charlot shows the family. And what does this tell us about them and their relationship? Luke 10:38-42 introduces us to Mary and Martha in their home. Lazarus features in this gospel story in John chapter 11. Let's continue with looking at some works of art. We'll begin with one of the oldest mosaics that we know, depicting Jesus drawing Lazarus out of the tomb. And what do you notice here? Here Jesus draws Lazarus out of a Roman mausoleum, and his hand is stretched out with that gesture of blessing. I find Eastern icons so interesting. There's something maybe a little foreign to our Western culture, but the more we look at them, the more details we find, and perhaps, hopefully, we are drawn into the picture, into the depiction, and deeper into our faith. One of the things that I've noticed in the icons we'll be looking at today is how the mountains seem to part, almost like a curtain or like bookends to draw us into the centrality of the story. And then notice some details in these. Mary and Martha bowed low. And how can we tell who is who? Would it interest you to know that Mary is always the one who has Jesus' foot on her garment? And what Bible story does that remind us of? Often we see two youngsters working the stone, and then almost always there's someone holding their sleeve to their nose near the tomb. Let's take some time and see what else we can notice in this Orthodox icon from 500 years ago. This Italian painter's work shows some of the features of the icon. Mary bowed low, a young man pulling away the door from the tomb, and mountains pointing up toward God. What else do you notice in this image? And a Russian Orthodox icon. What do you notice here? Contemporary iconographers producing works for Western prayer incorporate many traditional elements, as you can see here. The question I'll ask over and over in these visual Bible studies, what did you notice? Sometimes that gives us a clue as to how God is leading us more deeply into the story. Let's get to some of the words now. Now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who had anointed the Lord with perfumed oil and dried his feet with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who is ill. So the sisters sent word to him, saying, Master, the one you love is ill. When Jesus heard this, he said, This illness is not to end in death, but is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he remained for 2 days in the place where he was. Let's pause here for a moment. 2 things to notice, I think. Jesus mentioning this illness is not to end in death. This is one of those instances in John's Gospel where Jesus says one thing and his listeners are confused or they misunderstand and interpret differently. And also notice this harkens back to John 9, when Jesus was asked about the reason for the man being born blind. The opportunity here, Jesus says, is for the glory of God. When we read or listen to Bible passages, we can treat them the same as we have these works of art. What did we notice? What word or phrase were we drawn to? God has created us human beings as people with imagination and curiosity, and God often speaks to us through our imagination, where our eyes are drawn to, what our ears notice. So as we continue with this text and also with the images, attend to what God is helping you to notice. We read here Jesus loved his friends, and perhaps that is an appeal to us. So let's take a look at some of the happier times when Jesus enjoyed the company of these two women. You remember what this painting depicts. Jesus telling Martha that her sister has chosen the better portion. What do you notice in this realistic painting? In addition to the people, did you notice the flowers, the trees, the birds? And as always, you know that with these paintings, you can always keep your finger on the pause button if you want a longer look. Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just trying to stone you, and you want to go back there?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in a day? If one walks during the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks at night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him." This passage seems to be a sidelight to the central story, but it is so interesting. The evangelist is pointing back to other episodes in the gospel through just these words here. The Jews were just trying to stone you. This goes back to the 8th chapter of John, when Jesus causes outrage among the Pharisees. And this last paragraph here, one walking during the day, remember John chapter 4 from 2 weeks ago. The woman at the well encounters Jesus in the middle of the day. And if you know your Gospel of John, you'll remember back at John 3, when the Pharisee Nicodemus comes to Jesus in the middle of the night. Who is the effective evangelizer? The woman was able to convert her whole town. Nicodemus the Pharisee found very little support among his fellows. He said this, and then he told them, "Our friend Lazarus is asleep, but I am going to awaken him." So the disciples said to him, "Master, if he is asleep, he will be saved." But Jesus was talking about his death, while they thought he meant ordinary sleep. So then Jesus said to them clearly, "Lazarus has died, and I am glad for you that I was not there, that you may believe. Let us go to him." So Thomas, called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go to die with him." In this map, we see the location of Bethany, very close to Jerusalem, less than 2 miles, less than the distance between our parishes in Bremerton, Star of the Sea, and Holy Trinity. Just a side note here, you'll see Qumran on the right of this map, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, only about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise." Martha said to him, "I know he will rise in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world." This brief conversation between Martha and the Lord tells us so much about her faith, and perhaps gives us some insight as to our own. Notice Martha says, "Whatever you ask of God, he will give you," and this harkens back to Jesus' miracle at Cana at the wedding, when Mary says, "Do whatever he tells you." And then notice Martha's profession of faith, and notice that she has come to her faith gradually. She confesses, "I have come to believe." She knows Jesus is a miracle worker and one favored by God, but she does not yet realize that he is the life and the resurrection. What do you notice in this painting of Jesus embracing Martha by the contemporary artist Daniel Bonnell? When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary secretly, saying, "The teacher is here and is asking for you." As soon as she heard this, she rose quickly and went to him, for Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still where Martha had met him. So when the Jews who were with her in the house comforting her saw Mary get up quickly and go out, they followed her, presuming that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled and said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Sir, come and see." And Jesus wept. Two wonderful brief phrases, "come and see." It goes all the way back to the first chapter of this gospel, when the first disciples encounter Jesus and they want to know more about him. And then, of course, many of us are drawn to Jesus wept. Here is a painting from the French artist James Tissot. What do you notice here? So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have done something so that this man would not have died?" So Jesus, perturbed again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay across it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, "Lord, by now there will be a stench. He has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd here I have said this, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. Few artists, I think, can match the drama of this Rembrandt painting. What do you notice here? A very different style from this French painter, but still a lot of drama to see. What do you notice here? African missionaries sponsored a series of paintings known as Jesus Mafa, depicting Jesus as an African. Here's another in a series that we've seen in previous Bible studies, and it even uses the traditional elements of the 2 young people working the stone in the tomb. But aside from all of that, what do you notice here? Most every depiction we've seen in this Bible study shows a crowd. But here, the contemporary painter Eric Kent Wallis depicts just Jesus and Lazarus. And what do you notice in this encounter? And now our episode comes to an end. One final conversation. So Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." Now many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what he had done began to believe in him. What a marvelous last phrase. They began to believe in him. John's Gospel shows us that faith doesn't often come to us in a sudden flash of inspiration, but we need to be coaxed invited and drawn into that friendship with Jesus. Let's look at a few more paintings before we conclude. What do you make of this depiction by the Italian Caravaggio? Did you notice the similarity with Jesus being taken down from the cross, the outstretched arms, his being stripped of clothing, and the loving gesture of his sister? What do you notice in this depiction by the French painter James Tissot? Some people find modern art off-putting, but I find that the more I stay with it, like the icons, the more I notice things. What do you notice here in this depiction by another contemporary American artist? People of different cultures can help us with a new perspective or vantage point on these Bible stories. What do you notice from this contemporary Nicaraguan painter, Jose Ignacio Fleites Cruz? The fine American contemporary artist Jody Simmons gives us another interpretation of the raising of Lazarus. What do you notice here? With this image, we conclude our Bible study, our look at the raising of Lazarus. Maybe a few questions to ponder. In these days of worry and stress, where do we find new life? Where is our opportunity to encounter Jesus and find the life he offers us? And if Jesus was kind enough to raise the one he loved from the dead, what else can he do for us? What more will he do for us? If you are interested, older Bible studies are now available on this website. Thank you for taking the time to stop by. I wish you the best as you encounter the gospel readings or any of the Bible that you are reading in your own spiritual lives. I wish you blessings and peace on your day.